The first thing I noticed was the folder. Cream-colored, monogrammed with my mother's initials, sitting next to the cake like it belonged there more than the flowers did. My mother stood up at the head of the table, tapped her spoon against her wine glass 3 times, and waited for the room to go quiet before she said it. Sophie already had her chance at that money. She let it sit there doing nothing. So starting Monday, it's going to help someone who actually knows what to do with an education. Lacey's graduate program is fully funded now. You should be happy, Sophie. The money's finally going to someone with ambition. 22 people were sitting around 3 pushed-together tables at Vittorio's. All of them holding forks over half-eaten tiramisu, all of them looking at me. My cousin Lacey had her hand pressed over her mouth like she was trying to keep the surprise in. My Uncle Tom was already clapping. And I was sitting there with a napkin in my lap, a glass of water sweating onto the tablecloth in front of me, and 11 years of quiet decisions collapsing inward like a house with the studs pulled out. My name is on that account, not my mother's, mine. And she was about to find out exactly what that meant in front of everyone she'd invited to watch her hand my future to somebody else. If you have ever sat in a room and watched someone rewrite your life, out loud, hit follow before you go any further, because this one goes all the way through. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. My name is Sophie Keene. I'm 30 years old. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I work as a financial aid counselor at a state university, which is a detail that matters more than it sounds like it should. Because for 11 years, my own mother had absolutely no idea what my job actually was. She thought I helped kids fill out forms. She was not entirely wrong. She was also missing the point by about 100 miles. The dinner that night was supposed to be for my cousin Lacey's college graduation. A bachelor's degree in communications from a school 2 hours north of here. The kind of degree that gets you a job in social media marketing, if you're lucky, and a job folding sweaters, if you're not. My mother, Renata, had organized the whole thing. Private room at the back of Vittorio's, a banner that said, "Congratulations, Lacey," taped crooked above the dessert table. A seating chart she'd made on her phone and texted to the restaurant like she was planning a wedding. I want to explain something about my family before I tell you what happened at that dinner, because if I don't, you won't understand why I sat there for as long as I did before I did anything about it. My grandmother, Eleanor Keene, was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was already whole. She died when I was 26, 3 years before that dinner, and in the 11 years before that, starting when I turned 19, she had been quietly putting money into an account with my name on it, not my mother's name, mine. She did it through a bank downtown, the kind with brass railings and a security guard who says good morning to everyone by name. And the man who handled the paperwork was a bank officer named Arnold Benton, who I will get to. Because he is the reason this story has an ending instead of just a wound. My mother knew the account existed. What she did not know, or chose not to know, or decided over time to simply forget was what kind of account it actually was. Let me start the catalog, because there's a lot of ground to cover, and every piece of it left a mark. The first object is a manila envelope, thin, slightly bent at one corner. That used to live in the bottom drawer of my mother's desk. I found it when I was 17, looking for Scotch tape before a school project. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed statement from the bank, my name at the top. A balance that made my chest go tight, because I had never seen that many zeros attached to anything with my name on it. I asked my mother about it that night at dinner, holding my fork very carefully, trying to sound casual. She took the envelope out of my hands without raising her voice and said, "That's not something you need to worry about. Grandma set it up. It's complicated." I was 17. I believed her. I put the envelope back exactly where I found it and never mentioned it. Again, because that was the rule in our house. Unspoken, but absolute. Questions about money were questions about loyalty, and loyalty was not something you were supposed to have to ask for. The second object is a laminated brochure for a private university. One my mother had picked up at a college fair and left on my bed with a sticky note that said, "This one has a good business program. Call Monday." I was 18. I had already decided, quietly, to go to a state school instead, because I had done the math myself. Sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator and a legal pad. And the state school left me almost no debt, while the private one would have swallowed that custodial account whole in 2 years and left me borrowing for the other 2. When I told her my decision, she looked at the brochure, then at me, and said, "You're being small about this, Sophie. Grandma didn't save that money so you could go somewhere ordinary," I remember thinking. Even then, that she talked about the money like it belonged to a decision she got to make, not like it belonged to me. The third object is a stack of scholarship award letters, 4 of them, that I earned during undergrad through nothing but my own applications. Typed at night after work, edited twice, submitted with shaking hands because I was terrified of the rejection emails that came for the other 6 I applied to. Those 4 letters covered almost half of my tuition. I never touched the custodial account for a single semester. I worked a desk job at the campus library 20 hours a week. I lived on ramen and a meal plan I split with 3 roommates. And I graduated with less than $4,000 of debt, which I paid off within 2 years of getting my first job. My mother never once asked to see those letters. She found out about the scholarships secondhand from my aunt at a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years later, and her only comment was, "Well, that was smart of you, saving Grandma's money like that." Saving it. Like I had simply been careful with something that was still hers to spend. The fourth object is a framed photo that used to sit on the mantle. In my mother's living room, a picture of me at my college graduation, cap slightly crooked, diploma rolled in my hand. Somewhere around the time Lacey started her junior year, that photo got moved to a side table in the hallway. And a new frame appeared on the mantle in its place, one holding a photo of Lacey at her high school graduation, younger, glossier, taken at a moment when nobody in the family had decided yet what she'd amount to. I noticed the swap on a random Sunday visit and didn't say anything. I told myself I was being petty for even noticing. I was not being petty. I was watching my mother quietly redraw the family in real time. The fifth object is a gift card, $50 to a bookstore, that my mother gave me the Christmas after I finished my master's degree in higher education administration, a degree I paid for myself, in cash, over 3 years, working full-time the entire way through. She handed it to me wrapped in tissue paper and said, "I know you already spent your own money on all that schooling, but I wanted you to have something." Lacey, that same Christmas, received a check for $2,000 toward her first year of undergrad, written out in my mother's careful handwriting, presented in front of the whole family like a magic trick. Nobody in the room seemed to notice the arithmetic. I noticed. I noticed everything by then. I had started keeping a small notebook, not out of any plan yet, just out of the need to have somewhere to put things down so they would stop rattling around loose in my chest. The sixth object is a voicemail, still saved on my phone the night of the dinner, left by my Uncle Tom about 4 months before Lacey's graduation. In it, he said, cheerful, oblivious, "Hey, Soph, your mom mentioned there's some old college fund just sitting around collecting dust, and Lacey's thinking about grad school." And I said, well, that money should go where it's actually needed, right? Anyway, give me a call. I listened to that voicemail 4 times the day I got it. Sitting in my car in the parking lot of my own office. A building full of financial aid files, where I spent my working hours helping strangers understand exactly why an account with a specific owner cannot simply be redirected because a family member decides it should be. I did not call Tom back. I called Mr. Benton instead, and that call changed the shape of everything that came after. I should tell you about Mr. Benton now, because he is not a twist that appears out of nowhere at the end of this story. He had been in the background the whole time, patient, thorough. Exactly the kind of quiet, professional competence that people like my mother tend to underestimate, right up until it's standing in front of them holding a piece of paper they can't argue with. Arnold Benton had worked at the same downtown branch for over 30 years. He had handled my grandmother's accounts since before I was born, and when she came in the year I turned 19 to open the custodial account, he was the one who sat across the desk from her and explained patiently the way he explained everything. Exactly what kind of account she was choosing and what it would mean. A custodial account, for anyone who has never had to learn this the hard way like I did, is not a joint account, and it is not a gift you can take back. When my grandmother opened it, she was the custodian, meaning she managed it, but the money legally belonged to me from the moment it was deposited. The law is specific about this, and it does not bend for family feelings. When I turned 21, per the terms my grandmother had set with Mr. Benton, the custodianship automatically terminated and full ownership transferred to me. Not shared ownership, not access, ownership. My grandmother received a transfer notice confirming it. I received one too, mailed to the dorm address I'd given the bank, which I remember opening at 19 years old and not fully understanding. Filing away in a box under my bed because it looked like every other piece of bank mail I'd learned to ignore. My mother was never the custodian. My mother's name does not appear anywhere on that account, not on the original paperwork, not on the transfer notice, not on a single beneficiary ledger entry in 30 years of records. She knew the account existed because my grandmother, in a rare moment of transparency, had mentioned it to her once at a family dinner. And my mother had spent the following decade treating that one mention like it made her a stakeholder. I did not fully understand any of this myself until I was 24, 3 years after the transfer had already happened. Sitting in a training session for my new job as a financial aid counselor, listening to a presentation on custodial accounts and how they intersect with financial aid eligibility. Something the trainer said made my stomach drop. A small detail about ownership timelines. And that night, I drove to the downtown branch during my lunch break the next day and asked to speak to whoever had handled my grandmother's accounts. That's when I met Mr. Benton in person for the first time as an adult. A compact man in his 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a manner so calm it was almost unsettling, given how much my own family ran on volume. He pulled my file without hesitation once I confirmed my identity. He walked me through every page, the original custodial agreement my grandmother had signed, the annual statements, the transfer notice dated the week of my 21st birthday, and the current beneficiary ledger, which listed exactly one name as the sole owner of record. Mine. Your grandmother was very specific about this, he told me that day, tapping the folder with one finger. She came in here and she said, and I remember this because it isn't the kind of thing people usually say, she said, This money needs to end up debt-free in the hands of the girl who never asks for anything. Those were close to her exact words. She didn't want it touched by anyone else, not even for a good reason. Especially not for a good reason, she said. Because good reasons are how people talk themselves into things. I sat in his office that day and cried for the first time in years. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time since I was 17 years old, holding a bent manila envelope, someone had confirmed out loud that the money had always, actually, legally, unambiguously been mine. I did not tell my mother any of this. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for what happened later. I kept the account exactly as it was, untouched, growing quietly, because I did not need it. I had scholarships, then a stable job, then savings of my own. I told myself the account could wait until I needed a down payment on a house, or a rainy day large enough to justify touching what my grandmother had built. I did not tell my mother the ownership had transferred because some old habit in me still believed that telling her would start a fight I didn't have the energy for. And because some other part of me, quieter and more honest, suspected that if she ever fully understood the account was legally mine and not some family resource she could still lay claim to, she would find a way to feel entitled to it anyway. I was right about that. I was just wrong about the timing. The cold, calm pivot happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 months before the graduation dinner, sitting in my car after Tom's voicemail. I stopped feeling hurt somewhere around the third time I listened to it and started feeling something else instead, something with edges. I opened the little notebook I'd been keeping for years, the one full of gift cards and swapped photo frames and moved mantles, and I started a new page. At the top, I wrote one line. What can they actually do? I called Mr. Benton that same afternoon from the parking lot, my hands steady in a way that surprised me. I asked him directly whether anyone besides me had legal authority to move funds. Out of that account, given a name, given a family connection, given anything short of my own signature. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that comes from someone choosing their words with care instead of scrambling for them. Sophie, I want to be very clear with you, he said. No one has that authority except you. Not your mother, not anyone else named in that family. The custodianship ended 9 years ago. If anyone approaches this branch, or any branch, claiming they can redirect those funds, they will be told the same thing I'm telling you now. But I'll also tell you this. People sometimes act as though paperwork is optional if the family story is loud enough. I've seen it more than once. If that happens to you, you call me directly, not the branch line, me. I'll set it right in front of whoever needs to hear it. I asked him, half joking, half not, whether he'd actually say all that out loud if it ever came to it. He didn't laugh. I've been doing this 32 years, he said. I've watched families do a lot of things to each other over money that was never theirs to move. I don't enjoy being the person who has to correct that in front of a room. But I will do it every time I'm asked because your grandmother trusted me to make sure this account did exactly what she intended. And I take that seriously, even now that she's gone. I hung up the day with something I hadn't had in a long time, which was a plan instead of a wound. I did not confront my mother. I did not tell Lacey. I simply requested, quietly, a printed copy of the full account history, the original. Custodial agreement, the transfer notice, and the current beneficiary ledger, all with the bank's official seal, and I put them in a folder of my own, plain, unmarked, no monogram, and I put that folder in my bag. And I waited, because some part of me already knew my mother would not simply let this rest as an idea. She would want a stage. She got her stage 4 months later at Vittorio's, under a banner that said, "Congratulations, Lacey," in front of 22 people holding forks. Let me go back to the dinner now and tell you what happened after. That first cruel line, because the room did not go quiet out of respect. It went quiet, the way rooms do when everyone senses a car accident is about to happen and nobody wants to be the one who looks away first. My mother kept talking, riding the momentum of her own announcement, pulling papers out of that cream-colored folder, like she was closing a business deal. "I already spoke to the bank," she said, holding up a printed page I recognized instantly as an account inquiry form, the generic kind anyone can request. The kind that shows a balance and almost nothing else. The money's just sitting there. Sophie doesn't need it. She's got her steady little job, and Lacey's program starts in the fall. I've already told them we'd be transferring the funds this week. Lacey, to her credit, looked uncomfortable in a way that would matter later. She glanced at me, then at her plate, then said quietly, "Aunt Renata, are you sure Sophie's okay with this?" It was the only decent thing anyone said at that table for the next several minutes. And I want to give her that, because it would have been easy for her not to say it at all. My mother waved a hand like she was swatting a fly. "Sophie's always been the responsible one. She'll be fine. Honestly, she should be relieved. That money's been sitting there since she was a teenager, doing nothing, helping no one. At least now it's finally going to help someone with real ambition, someone who's actually going somewhere." Uncle Tom raised his glass. "To Lacey," he said, and half the table lifted their glasses too, out of pure social reflex. The way people do when they sense a toast has started and don't want to be the awkward holdout. I did not raise mine. I sat there, with my hand flat on the table, feeling the folder in my bag against my hip, where it had been resting the whole dinner, like something I hadn't decided yet whether I'd need. "Sophie." My mother turned to me directly now, her voice taking on that particular brightness she used when she wanted an audience to see her being generous. "You're not going to make this awkward, are you? This is a happy night. I want to be honest about the moment that followed, because I did not stand up immediately and deliver some perfect speech. I sat there for a few seconds, with my heart going hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. And I thought about every object in my notebook, the envelope, the brochure, the scholarship letters nobody asked to see, the swapped photo frame, the gift card, the voicemail. And I thought about Mr. Benton's voice on the phone saying, "You call me directly. I'll set it right in front of whoever needs to hear it." So I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and set it on the table next to my water glass. "Actually, Mom, I do have a question," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Steady enough that a few conversations further down the table actually stopped. "Who told you that account was still yours to move?" She blinked, caught slightly off guard by the directness. "It's not about whose it is, Sophie. It's about what's fair. Grandma would want it used." "Grandma did want it used," I said. "She wanted it used by me, debt-free. That was the whole point of it." "Don't be dramatic," my mother said, her smile tightening at the corners. "It's family money. It's always been family money." "It's not family money," I said. "It's my money. It's been my money since I turned 21. It stopped being anything you could touch 9 years ago. And honestly, Mom, it was never yours to begin with. You weren't even the one managing it. Grandma set it up with the bank directly." The table had gone fully quiet. now forks down, the banner overhead suddenly looking absurd against the tension underneath it. Lacey had her hands folded in her lap, watching the two of us with an expression somewhere between confusion and dread. Tom cleared his throat, like he wanted to intervene but didn't know on which side. My mother laughed, short and sharp, the kind of laugh people use when they're trying to reassert control of a room that's slipping. Sophie, you sound ridiculous right now. I have already talked to the bank. I have paperwork. She tapped the printed inquiry sheet again, like it was a trump card. That's an account summary, I said. It shows a balance. It doesn't show ownership. If you'd actually asked them who's authorized to move funds out of that account, they would have told you it's not you. You always do this, she said, and her voice had shifted now, lower, harder. The version of her that used to come out when I was a teenager, asking questions I wasn't supposed to ask. You always have to make everything difficult. This is Lacey's night. This is supposed to be a celebration. And you're sitting here trying to humiliate me in front of the whole family? Over a bank account. I'm not trying to humiliate you, I said. I'm trying to stop you from doing something you can't actually do. There's a difference. You wasted that money for 11 years, she said, and her voice climbed, the whole table watching now. Some of them with their phones lowered under the tablecloth in that specific way people do when they're recording something without wanting to look like they're recording it. You could have gone anywhere. You could have done anything with it, and instead, you just let it sit. They're being careful and small, the way you always are. Lacey is actually going to do something with her life. You should be grateful this money's finally going somewhere useful instead of just collecting. Dust, because you were too scared to use it. I felt that line land the way it was meant to land. Aimed at the softest part of me, the part that had spent 11 years quietly proving I didn't need saving and getting no credit for it. But I had already done the crying part of this story months earlier in Mr. Benton's office. What I had left at that table was something calmer. I didn't waste it, I said. I earned 4 scholarships you never once asked to see. I graduated almost debt-free without touching a cent of it. I paid for my own master's degree in cash, while you gave Lacey $2,000 and called it generosity. That money's been sitting there for 11 years, exactly the way Grandma wanted it to sit, untouched, growing. Waiting for me to use it the way she actually intended. Not the way you've decided is more convenient tonight. This is insane, my mother said, turning to the table now. Appealing to the room the way she always had when a conversation stopped going her way. Does everyone hear this? I'm trying to help her sister's daughter go to graduate school, and she's making it into some kind of court case. I picked up my phone. Let's just settle it then, I said. There's a man at the bank named Mr. Benton. He's managed this account since Grandma opened it. He'll be able to tell everyone here, right now, exactly who owns it, and whether you have any authority to move it. If I'm wrong, you can transfer the money Monday morning with my blessing. If I'm not, I'd like everyone at this table to hear that too. My mother's face did something complicated, a flicker of doubt crossing it, before she covered it with irritation. It's 8 o'clock at night, Sophie. Nobody's picking up a bank phone right now. I had already saved his personal line in my phone the day he gave it to me, 4 months earlier, exactly for a moment like this. I dialed it in front of the whole table and put the phone down flat, speaker on. Loud enough that the couple at the next table over glanced through the doorway of our private room before looking away, pretending not to listen while clearly listening. It rang twice. This is Arnold. His voice came through, calm as ever. a little tired, the way people sound at the end of a long day. Mr. Benton, it's Sophie Keene. I'm sorry to call you outside of hours. I'm at a family dinner, and there's a disagreement about my custodial account, the one my grandmother, Eleanor Keene, set up. Would you be willing to explain on speaker who the account belongs to? There. There was a brief pause, and I could picture him exactly. Glasses pushed up, sitting back in whatever chair he was in. I can do that, he said. Go ahead. You're on speaker, I said. My mother's here, Renata Keene. My cousin Lacey and my Uncle Tom are here too. All right, Mr. Benton said, his voice steady and clear enough to carry across the whole table. For the record, and I want to be precise about this because I know how these conversations get. That account was opened by Eleanor Keene as a custodial account under Sophie's name when Sophie was 19 years old. Eleanor was the custodian during Sophie's minority years, meaning she managed it on Sophie's behalf, but the funds legally belonged to Sophie from the day of each deposit. When Sophie turned 21, the custodianship terminated automatically, as specified in the original. Agreement and full ownership transferred to Sophie as an adult account holder. A transfer notice was mailed at that time confirming the change. That was 9 years ago. As of this evening, the sole name on that account's beneficiary ledger is Sophie Keene. No other individual, including Renata Keene, has ever held authority to direct, withdraw, or transfer funds from that account. I can also confirm that no request to move those funds has been approved or processed by this branch, because no one but Sophie has the standing to make that request. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice shifting in someone's glass. That's not possible, my mother said, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty, thinning out at the edges. I'm her mother. I have a right to know what's happening with family money. With respect, Mr. Benton said, it isn't family money. It was never structured that way. Eleanor was very specific when she opened this account. She told me directly, and I remember her words, that this money needed to end up debt-free in the hands of the person she trusted not to waste it, and that it should never be touched by anyone else, even for what seemed like a good reason at the time. She used that phrase, even for a good reason. I believe she anticipated exactly this kind of situation, which is part of why the account was structured the way it was, with no secondary authority attached to it at all. I watched my mother's face while he said it, watched something in her expression buckle for just a second before she caught herself. Before the old performance instinct kicked back in and she reached for control again. This is a misunderstanding, she said, loud now, turning to the table again. The bank's records are probably outdated. I'll call tomorrow and clear this up. Ma'am, Mr. Benton said, still calm, still clear. The records I just read are current as of this evening. I pulled them before this call, anticipating you might want confirmation. I'd be glad to email a copy of the ownership summary to Sophie, right now, if that would help settle the matter tonight rather than tomorrow. That won't be necessary, my mother said quickly. And I understood in that moment that some part of her had already known, or at least suspected, and had been counting on nobody ever checking closely enough to make her explain it out loud. Thank you, Mr. Benton, I said. I appreciate you taking the call. Of course, he said. Sophie, for what it's worth, your grandmother would be glad you asked the question, instead of letting it slide. That's exactly what she hoped you'd do if it ever came to this. I hung up. The table stayed silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses down on everyone sitting inside it differently, depending on what they'd been hoping the outcome would be. If you've ever had to prove something out loud that should never have needed proving, drop a comment and tell me what it was. I read every single one. Lacey was the first to speak, and I want to give her real credit for this part, because it would have been easy for her to just sit there and let the moment pass. "Aunt Renata," she said slowly, looking at my mother, "you told me the money was just sitting in some account nobody was using. You told me Sophie already agreed to it. You said she was happy about it." My mother's jaw tightened. "I said she'd understand. I was going to explain it to her properly. I just wanted tonight to be a surprise. A celebration." "You made it sound like Sophie already knew," Lacey said. And her voice had an edge in it now I hadn't heard from her before. The sound of someone realizing she'd been used as a prop in a story that wasn't true. "You had me thinking I was doing something exciting, and the whole time you were just taking money that isn't even yours to give." "Lacey, you told me she wasted her chance," Lacey said, cutting her off. And I felt something in my chest ease slightly at hearing someone else say the sentence out loud, someone who hadn't lived inside it for 11 years. "You told everyone that, and it wasn't even true. She had scholarships, she paid off her own degree. You never told me any of that. You just made her sound like she failed at something so I wouldn't feel bad taking it." My mother's counterattack came fast. The way it always did when she felt cornered, pivoting from defense straight into offense, without pausing to acknowledge anything true that had just been said. "You are both being incredibly ungrateful," she said, standing now, her chair scraping back hard enough that a couple of people flinched. "I have spent my entire life trying to hold this family together, trying to make sure everyone had a fair shot. And this is what I get. A phone call in front of my family? A bank officer correcting me like I'm some kind of criminal. Sophie, I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me at your own cousin's?" "Graduation dinner." "I didn't humiliate you," I said, and I kept my voice level. Because I had promised myself, sitting in that parking lot 4 months earlier, that whenever this moment finally came, I would not let it turn into the version of the fight she wanted, the loud one. The one where I looked unstable and she looked reasonable by comparison. "You tried to give away money that was never yours in front of 22 people and then called me ungrateful for stopping you. I think everyone here can see the difference. You've always thought you were smarter than everyone else in this family," she said. And there was real bitterness in it now, something old surfacing, something that had probably been sitting under the surface since I was 17 and found that envelope. "Ever since you were a little girl, your grandmother always favored you, you know that? Always slipping you things, always telling you that you were special. It wasn't fair to Lacey. It wasn't fair to me. Grandma didn't favor me because she liked me more," I said quietly. "She favored me because she trusted me. There's a difference, Mom. You could have earned that same trust. You just never wanted to be careful with anything that wasn't already certain to work out." That landed harder than I expected it to, harder than I intended. And for a second, my mother just stood there, mouth slightly open, nothing coming out. Tom shifted in his seat, staring at the tablecloth like it had suddenly become fascinating. A couple of the other relatives were quietly gathering coats, the universal signal that a family gathering had crossed the point of being salvageable. "I want to go home," my mother said finally, her voice smaller now, stripped of the earlier grandeur. "This whole night is ruined." "The night was ruined the moment you tried to give my grandmother's money away without asking me," I said. "I'm sorry it happened at Lacey's dinner. that part I actually do regret. She didn't deserve to have her graduation turned into this. Lacey looked at me across the table, something raw in her expression. "I'm sorry, Sophie," she said. "I should have asked you directly, instead of just believing what she told me. I got excited about the program, and I didn't think about where the money was actually coming from. That's on me, too." "You didn't know," I said. "She made sure you didn't know. That's not the same as you doing something wrong." My mother left not long. After that, gathering her coat and her cream-colored folder, the printed inquiry sheet still sitting on the table where she'd left it, suddenly looking like nothing at all. A piece of paper with a number on it, and no power behind it. Tom followed her out a few minutes later, muttering something about calling me tomorrow to talk it through, which he never actually did. The rest of the table dissolved slowly into smaller conversations, subdued. The kind of aftermath that follows any dinner where something true got said too loudly for anyone to pretend they hadn't heard it. I sat there for a while after most people had gone, Lacey still across. From me, the banner still crooked overhead, the cake half-eaten, my phone dark on the table, where it had done exactly what I needed it to do. "Can I ask you something?" Lacey said. "Sure." "Are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean." "Not because of me. I'm not asking for anything. I just mean, is this going to be a whole legal mess now?" "No," I said. The account was never actually in danger, legally. It couldn't have been touched no matter what my mother tried. I just needed everyone to hear that out loud, instead of letting her keep telling a version where I wasted something I never actually had control over giving. Way in the first place. "I really am sorry," Lacey said again. "I know that doesn't undo tonight." "It helps more than you think," I said. And I meant it. I want to walk through what came after, because the real ending of this story isn't the phone call at the dinner table. That was the proof. What came after was the repair, or the version of repair that was actually available to me. Given who my mother is and how little she's willing to change, even when the facts are sitting in front of her in black and white. If stories about records, family truth, and quiet proof help your English practice, leave a short comment with one word you learned. In the weeks after the dinner, my mother called me exactly twice. The first call, she opened by saying, "I hope you're happy. You've made me the villain at every family gathering from now on." And I let her talk for about 4 minutes before I said I needed to go. The second call, 2 weeks later, she tried a softer approach, telling me she just wanted what was best for the family. That she didn't understand why I had to make it so public. That I could have just told her privately instead of calling the bank in front of everyone. I told her I had tried telling her things privately for years, and it had never once made a difference. And that the only reason anything changed that night was because there was finally a witness who couldn't be talked out of the truth. She didn't have a response to that. She has not apologized. Not really. Not in any form that resembles an actual admission that what she tried to do was wrong. The closest she has come is saying months later, at a smaller family gathering, "Well, I suppose the money was always technically yours," which is not an apology so much as a grudging acknowledgement of paperwork. But I have learned to take what's actually available instead of waiting for what I wish were available. Lacey and I, on the other hand, actually did repair something real. She reached out about a week after the dinner and asked if we could get coffee, just the two of us, away from the rest of the family. We sat in a small shop near campus for almost 2 hours, and she told me things I hadn't known. That my mother had been telling her for months that I had already agreed to the transfer. That I'd said I didn't need the money and wanted to see it go to someone who would actually use it. An entire narrative built and maintained specifically so Lacey would walk into that dinner grateful instead of guilty. She cried a little telling me that, apologizing again, and I told her the truth, which is that she had been lied to as thoroughly as I had, just from a different direction. We are close now in a way we weren't before, not because of the money, but because we finally had one honest conversation instead of the decades of surface-level family niceness that had kept both of us from ever really knowing each other. Lacey ended up getting into her graduate program on a partial assistantship and a combination of loans and a work-study position, funded the ordinary way, the way most people actually manage it. I did not offer her money from the account, and she did not ask, which I think says something good about both of us. What I did instead was something I'd been circling in my head for months, something that grew directly out of everything that happened. About 6 months after the dinner, using a portion of the funds from the account, not all of it, because I still intend to use some of it exactly the way my grandmother meant toward a home someday, toward the kind of stability she wanted for me. I started a small scholarship guide, a free resource for first-generation students trying to navigate financial aid without anyone in their family who understands how any of it works. I know that world intimately, both from my job and from my own life. From being the kid who found a bank envelope she didn't understand and had to learn, slowly and mostly alone, what her own money actually meant and how to protect it. I built the guide around the specific gaps I kept seeing at work: custodial, accounts and how ownership transfers, scholarship restrictions that trip families up, the difference between a fund that's yours and a fund that's simply been mentioned to you once at a dinner table. I named the project after my grandmother, quietly, in small print at the bottom of the site. Nothing showy. Just her name, where I would see it every time I updated the page. Mr. Benton, when I told him about it, offered to review the financial sections for accuracy, unpaid, on his own time. Because he said Eleanor would have liked the idea of her money eventually helping other kids understand exactly what I had to learn the hard way. We still get coffee sometimes, every couple of months, and he still calls me Sophie in that same even voice. And I've come to think of him as one of the few adults in my life who never once tried to make my story about anything other than what was actually true. My mother has not asked about the scholarship guide. I don't think she ever will. I've made a kind of peace with that, the same way I've made peace with a lot of things about her over the past year. Not because she changed, but because I finally stopped waiting for her to. If this one stayed with you, subscribe and tell me in the comments what detail you would have kept as proof. There's one object I want to end on, because it's the one that actually matters most, more than the folder, more than the printed inquiry sheet, more than any of it. A few weeks after the dinner, going through a box of my grandmother's old things that my mother had never bothered to sort through, still sitting in her garage 3 years after the funeral, I found a small green savings passbook, the old-fashioned kind, cardboard cover gone soft at the corners, the kind banks used to hand out before everything moved online. It wasn't the account itself, that had long since gone digital, tracked in Mr. Benton's careful ledgers. This was older, a passbook from decades earlier, from when my grandmother first opened. Her own very first savings account as a young woman, long before I existed. Long before any of this family drama had a shape. Inside the cover, in handwriting I recognized instantly, she had written a single line. Save first. Ask no one's permission to keep what's yours. I don't know if she wrote that for herself at 20, or if she wrote it later, thinking of someone else entirely. Maybe even thinking of me before I was born, the way grandmothers sometimes seem to plan for people who don't exist yet. I keep that passbook on my desk now, next to my computer, where I do the actual work of the scholarship guide most evenings after my regular job ends. I don't need it for anything practical. It holds no active funds, no legal weight, nothing a bank would recognize today. But I look at it most days before I start writing. Before I answer another email from a student who found the site and doesn't know where to start, and I think about a woman who understood, decades before I was old enough to understand it myself, that the safest thing you can build for someone you love is something no one else can talk their way into holding. That's the whole story. Not a perfect ending, because my mother never really apologized, and some part of our relationship stayed exactly as brittle as it was before that dinner. But it's a true ending, and it's mine. Sitting on a desk in Madison, next to a small green passbook that says everything I needed someone to say to me a long time before anyone finally did.